Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to what is the first in a long time video. We haven't done one of these in forever. And by forever, I mean like 2021 probably. Because we got into the live streams and we just kind of got away from doing this. But I have two of my very best friends in the VC. Obviously, you know who they are. Chris Prophy from Chris Prophy's Musically Obsessed. And of course, Aaron Mutha Alamere, who I had the pleasure of visiting earlier this year. And actually, I'm going to be dropping in on Chris in October. So I'm super excited about that. But how's it going, fellas?
Going good. Glad to be doing this again. Yeah, it's funny because when we got on, Aaron and I were like, when was the last time we actually got together? It was a long time ago.
Yeah, well, I just thought, summer got busy and it just got away from me. Next thing I knew, it's like, holy shit, it's been 2 months since I've done even a live stream video. So hopefully we can do this with some consistency again, even if it's 3 or 4 or 5 of us. Gary's having some technical problems. Josh has got some family obligations. Brandon's not feeling well. So who knows, next week maybe it'll be all of us, maybe it'll be a couple of us, I don't know. But speaking of the devil,
Here comes Gary.
there's Gary. Hopefully there he is.
Oh, there's
Jeez.
Gary.
Gary from Physical Format Rock and Roll. We're live. Well, not live, Gary, but we're recording right now, so don't pick your nose or anything. But
I can't believe I'm actually talking with Gary from Physical Format Rock and Roll.
That's how I feel about you guys. It's great to see everybody.
Good to see you too.
Aaron, Jeff, Chris,
hey.
Love you guys, man. I miss you.
Yeah, we're trying to figure out how long has it been since we've done one of these. It's got to be like 2021.
It's been a while.
Yeah,
it's been a while. I know that.
Yeah. Anyway, I think you had a beard last time we did one of these, but anyway,
I might have. Yeah, Aaron still does.
Yeah. Funny enough. So anyway, our video today, we picked a topic. I picked a topic actually, and it's going to be 10 essential albums from the 1980s, and that may mean different things to different people. And so, before you show your first record, just kind of explain what that means to you. 10 essential albums of the 1980s. How did you arrive at the 10 albums that you're going to show, and what's your definition of essential, I guess? And if we're going to go clockwise, based on my screen view, we're going to go Gary, then Chris, then Aaron, and then myself. So Gary, why don't you kick us off with your first pick, and how did you arrive at the 10 albums that you're going to be showing us tonight?
Okay, well, my first pick, I guess I'll tell you how I came about it first, is I kind of went like thinking if I was going to pick 10 albums for somebody to listen to that I really think are great and that are important albums of the 80s, have some sort of meaning to me, and I tried to make a little bit of a variety of it. I guess that's kind of my thinking on that. So I tried not to think. There's a couple of them that I kind of thought, one or two you guys might pick, but I thought, I don't want that to influence me, so I went ahead and picked some of them anyway. And I know you guys are going to say some, and I'm going to go, oh yeah, shit, I should have put that one on there. So, but this is what I picked for now. So show my first one, right? Is that what you said?
Yes, Gary.
Okay.
Gary, show your first record.
I went from 1982, In Excess, Shaboo Shabba.
Yes.
I think this is an important album because it seemed kind of like a turning point for In Excess. And, Michael Hutchison was probably one of the best performers and a big personality of the 1980s. And this particular album really gets to me. I feel like it's unique, and it has elements of other things into it, but I really like it. And Don't Change is one of my favorite songs from the 1980s. And plus, I can dance to this. So this is my first pick.
And I know you love to dance, Gary.
I do.
That's my favorite NXS album by a mile. I love that album. It's back when they were so like not many people knew who they were. I remember seeing them on MTV for the first time, like, who is this? But I loved first video I saw by them was The One Thing.
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine had the cassette. And when we would drive around, we'd listen to that cassette. I'm like, holy shit, this album is great. And Don't Change, obviously, on there. Old World, New World. I love that whole album is just a great, great new wave synth pop masterpiece. Absolutely love that one.
All right.
Oddly, I have 3 NXS records, and I've never heard that one.
I've never
really?
heard it either. I've heard Listen Like Thieves, and what was the big one? Kick or no?
Kick, yeah.
Kick, yeah.
Yeah,
Which
Shabu
I think both
Shaba.
those albums are great too.
Shabu Shaba is awesome. Yeah.
Nice.
Great
Great
pick.
pick.
Thanks.
All right, my turn.
Yep.
All right, so I, like many of us, I always associate the 80s with MTV. And so I started to think back to, what were some of the songs I got turned on to, and what were some of the artists and albums I got turned on to by watching MTV, and then ended up adding them to my collection when I was a kid. Also, just kind of what I was listening to growing up. And I felt like a couple of the albums I was like, I've shown this album before. So I was trying to think of like an alternate album by that artist to show. So a couple of these might be like an alternate album by the artist, but I feel like it's still on par with, another release that they would have done. And the first album I'm going to show is by the Cars, Heartbeat City. This is a reissue of the album. And it's funny because I'm not a huge Cars fan, but I was looking at the songs on this, and this is the album that I started to get into the Cars with, because I believe that this was their 5th album, 1984, produced by Mutt Lange. We all know about Mutt Lange. And then I'm looking at the hits: Hello Again, Looking for Love, Drive, You Might Think. And, I remember seeing a lot of those videos, and it's just a great pop album. And to me, it's sort of it has that 80s sound, but it doesn't sound too dated when you listen to it. I mean, some 80s stuff really, really sounds dated, I feel like. And I mean, again, I don't know what major Cars fans would say about this record. I'm not a huge Cars fan. Maybe that's why I like this record a lot, but I'm going with Heartbeat City.
My memory of that is, that came out, 1984?
Yeah.
And my dad just bought a new car. I remember it was a Bonneville, and it had a cassette player, which no car we'd had up to that point had a cassette player. And it's like, holy shit, you can actually listen to music. You can listen to a cassette in the car. Yeah. And that was one of the cassettes he bought. He bought that and the Best of the Everly Brothers. And so I still have this visceral, when I listened to that, I remember driving around in that new car, listening to Heartbeat City, and Magic, and You Might Think.
Oh, Magic, yeah.
Drive. So many classic songs on that. And that was like, their first, not their first, they had videos like Shake It Up, they had some videos from Shake It Up on there, but I think that was Live Aid was right around that time, like the next year, Live Aid, and they were in Live Aid, and they played, a couple songs from that album. But yeah, it's not my favorite Cars album, but it's still a really, really good Cars album.
I agree. And I remember vividly the video for Magic. That's what drew me into that one. Was walking in the swimming pool. Like,
yes.
You can kind of see the plexiglass thing he's walking on, but not really. But yeah, I love that album. I got it on cassette when it first came out, and I was into the Cars before that, but that's a great album.
Yeah.
Good pick.
Thanks.
All right, Aaron.
So when you first told me we were doing this, I pulled 50 records. And I still have them all down here. I'm only going to show 10, but See, I was going all over the place. I went with all the pop stuff. I went with the heavy metal, the thrash. There's all that stuff, but I'm just going to center on 10 essential hard and heavy records, because that's when I was really getting into that, starting to get into that kind of music, was in the mid 80s and then I went off from there. So the first one that really got me into the hard and heavy music was this one here, Quiet Riot with Mental Health. And you can't really talk about 80s heavy music without mentioning this record, with the songs Mental Health and Come On Feel the Noise, and it was just all over the place. It was the first heavy, would consider heavy metal record to go to #1.
Yeah.
And it just totally changed my perspective on music, because I was into stuff like the Cars and Duran Duran and Loverboy and ZZ Top and the Beatles, and then this came out and it totally took me in a new direction. And then I had the videos for it, and it's an essential record of the 80s as far as I'm concerned. And people don't consider it heavy metal now, but it's got metal in the name, so it's heavy metal.
And I want to say too, that's a great pick, because I would say that and Stay Hungry by Twisted Sister, those are two gateway albums for people into heavy metal. And I was probably the same situation. Like, I was listening to Huey Lewis and the News and Cyndi Lauper and all this, and then you hear Quiet Riot and Twisted Sister, and it just kind of is like, oh, there's something different out there. So
yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Chris. That was definitely, those albums were definitely the gateway. I never listened to anything like heavier than like Deep Purple, and that, I remember when that came out, and Twisted Sister, and it was like, oh, I actually kind of like this. So, I mean, I'm not a metalhead or anything like that. Like, I didn't get into Iron Maiden until, just a year or two ago. But, in terms of the stuff that was on MTV, I mean, I think those videos helped sell a lot of those records also, because the videos were so entertaining. And I think that helped push the music too. But yeah.
I think with that album, because I remember when it came out, and initially I didn't really care about it, like the song Come On Feel the Noise. I was kind of like, I don't know, I thought it was kind of silly. But eventually I heard more of it. It was just so big, and it's like, well, I mean, I like hard rock and stuff, I should buy this album. So I eventually got the cassette of it, and I'm like, yeah, this is actually pretty good, Fly Up and all these different things. And it's like, those were the other songs on there that kind of got me past the fact that I thought Come On Feel the Noise was kind of stupid. I mean, Mental Health, Bang Your Head is it's a song that, like, lyrically it's dorky, but you can't help but love it. I mean, when I hear that song, I always rock out to it. It's just a good album. It's just a good, solid album.
You're a little older too, and I was in my early teens when that came out, so it was a different thing. When you're a little older, I can see where you think it was a little cornier, but being in an early teen here and that, it was like the coolest thing in the world.
Oh yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, so like when I heard it, I was 18, like when that album came out. So at first, but it won me over. It was powerful enough to win me over. So
what year did that come out?
83, I think.
I think so.
I was 9 years old.
I was 13, so just right when I was really just getting my own musical identity.
Well, sure. If you were 13, that album would have a huge impact on
you. I was just a youngin'.
Yep. You're just
a little baby. Just a little baby.
Little baby Chris.
Baby.
All right, for my 10 pick, I was thinking somebody who was maybe born after the 80s, and if they wanted to, they're collecting records, and if you were to recommend to them 10 albums from the 80s, like, I want to get into 80s music, but what would 10 albums be that would be essential for your collection to kind of represent the 1980s? And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. So the first one I'm going to show is going to be Pyromania by Def Leppard. I mean, talking about gateway, this was all over. These videos were all over MTV, Rock of Ages, you know, obviously. Photograph was on here. You know, so many of these tracks found their way onto MTV. Foolin', you know, they had a great video for that. And, you know, with the whole, you know, I don't think these were part of the, you know, new wave of British heavy metal per se, but they were very much British. You know, they wore the Union Jack, and they, you know, they totally were like very much British, but they was hard rocking, but it was melodic. The videos were entertaining. And this was my first exposure to really hard rock / heavy metal. I remember like my first music t-shirt that I ever had was a Def Leppard t-shirt. But you know, it's not their best album, obviously, but I think it's the one that most people of my age anyway probably identify with, because that was like my introduction to Def Leppard. I didn't know that there was High and Dry and, you know, On Through the Night. I didn't know any of that, but that it's just such a great album, and it doesn't sound dated when you listen to it. It's not one of those where it's like, oh yeah, it sounds of its time. It's still, I don't know. I listened to it today, and it still sounds very fresh. And you know, I think it's a great album.
You know, you had mentioned not their best. I might say it is their best album.
It's right there.
Yeah, a lot of people feel that way. It kind of sometimes, maybe it depends on, just like you guys were just saying, when you came into it. You know, I like High and Dry much better than I do that, but I love that album. And I tell you, another big thing about that album when it came out was it was one of the first times I remember girls liking hard rock.
Yeah.
You know, I can still remember playing it for, you know, a girl I knew, and she's like, yeah, play Photograph again, you know. And normally if I'm playing music I like, they're always like, you know, I hate this shit, you know. But that was something, all of a sudden you had male and females both liking that. So that was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, because not many girls were like, can you play Sign of the Southern Cross off of
Exactly.
for me again?
The really cool thing about that album too is the deep cuts, like Billy's Got a Gun and Too Late for Love, and what's that other one that I really love? Die Hard the Hunter. Those are probably my 3 favorites on there. And you'll even hear
Die Hard the Hunter for sure.
It's crazy, the deep cuts.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it was a, you know, I think a lot of people who thought, I'm not into heavy metal, I don't like hard rock. I think that was really an album that connected with a lot of people because it was very melodic. You had great choruses, great harmonies. I mean, it was the whole, you know, I'm with you, Gary. I like High and Dry a little bit better, but as far as, you know, Pyromania, I mean, that I'll always have nostalgia for that album just because.
So
yeah, you know, it was like MTV was new and those videos were out there, and yeah.
I think that was produced by Mutt Lange too. Pyromania.
Yeah, it was. But then he started driving downhill after that.
Yeah. All right, Gary, your next one.
Oh, okay. So my next one is from, I think, what is it, 1983, I believe. I went with Rebel Yell by Billy Idol. I mean, you know, this was another one that just like some of these albums you guys are talking about, you couldn't get away from this thing. It was everywhere. The videos were awesome. You know, you had those girls in leather pants smacking their butt to the drum beat and everything. And it's just, you know, Billy Idol and Steve Stevens, what a combination. I mean, you know, they started out doing all this stuff on a drum machine. And then they ended up bringing a drummer in for some of it, realizing, you know, they needed some of that feel. But, you know, you're talking about a guy who went from Generation X, being a punk rocker, to come into this, still having a punk edge, but all of a sudden now he's adding pop sensibilities. He's adding hard rock into it. And this is just one of these albums. You can listen to this sucker all the way through. You're not skipping a bunch of songs on it. And I just think this is brilliantly done. And like you were just saying about Chris, I think it holds up. To me, this doesn't sound dated. I can listen to a song like Blue Highway and go, man, that's a cool song. I mean, Flesh for Fantasy. I still love that. So I think this one holds up. And that's what I'm going with. Rebel Yell.
Yeah, I love that one.
I just see the sneer too.
Yeah.
See the sneer. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was definitely a MTV video darling of the time.
Yeah, well, he had the whole thing. He had the image, he had the sneer, he had the spiky hair, he had the attitude.
He had Downtown Julie Brown.
But he could back it up with the music. I mean, there were certainly some videos and some artists out there who there was no substance. Like, yeah, they were maybe, they looked good on camera or they had a funny video, but the music was not solid. Or maybe there was one song that made it onto MTV, but the rest of the album was garbage, But, with Billy Idol, like, yeah, there was substance behind. He'd been in Generation X, so it wasn't just like they found some guy off the street and put him in a video and he had one hit and then he disappeared. I mean, Billy Idol had hits into the 90s, so he had staying power as well. But yeah,
he's still going strong too.
Yeah.
Those EPs he released were excellent. So
good choice. All right, my next one's probably not going to be the most popular choice, but I don't think you can think of the 80s without mentioning this person. And I'm talking about Madonna. And this is her debut from 1983. I am a huge Madonna fan. And there are two songs on this album. Well, there are a few songs on this album that were hits. Lucky Star was a huge hit. Borderline was a huge hit. And so was Holiday. Everybody might have been as well. But Madonna, I mean, talk about 80s. All the girls wanted to dress like Madonna. I even wanted to dress like Madonna. I mean, this is just, it's great music. It's just 80s pop music. You can dance to it. Her videos were awesome. She was hot. When Lucky Star and Borderline come on the radio or whatever, or I put them on my phone, my kids know the songs. I sing along. I mean, I don't think you can talk about the 80s without talking about Madonna. So
that's true.
That's the Madonna that I want to remember. I don't want to remember like all that shit that she put out after the 80s, like in the 90s, where she just it became more about the cult of personality than the music, but that album is solid. Like a Prayer was a great album. The next one,
True Blue is great too.
Blue. Yeah, True Blue is excellent.
But I mean, Madonna just bled 80s. She's just, I don't know. Plus I feel like with her, and I'm not saying she's on par with David Bowie. I'm just saying that like David Bowie, she was able to bring fashion into the music, and that whole look just created the 80s look. So I think that was she kind of mixed fashion with music and it worked.
Yeah. Great pick. Yeah, Madonna, she went to she grew up in Rochester. She went to Rochester High School, which is a neighboring city to Troy, where I live right now. And so she was kind of like a hometown hero when she broke big. But she doesn't go around being like, I'm a Rochester girl or whatever. But anyway.
Were her and Ted Nugent neighbors?
What'd you say?
Was her and Ted Nugent, were they neighbors or?
Yeah, maybe. And then, she and Ted Nugent had a baby and it was Kid Rock.
But you're right though, Jeff, because I'm looking at her discography right now. 83 was her debut. Like a Virgin, 84. True Blue, 86. Like a Prayer, 89. And then she sort of fell off the wagon, I feel like, with Erotica.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah, that was weird.
I like Bedtime Stories and Ray of Light from the 90s, but I mean, you can't beat 80s Madonna though.
No, and she was a movie star too. I mean, you
Yeah.
know, Desperately Seeking
Desperately, yeah.
Susan and the other movies that she was in.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah.
It always reminds me of my sister because I was into like the heavier stuff and she was into Madonna, and so I didn't like her back then at all. My sister liked Madonna and Prince, so I hated them because I was going against her. Come to respect both them in my older age, but back then I did. I was I wouldn't have any of it.
Yeah,
I get you.
that was my girly pick for the night.
Well, it's a good pick.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I might have a couple other girly picks. We'll see what happens.
I'm sure you do.
Doing? All right, my next one here isn't my favorite album by this band, but it's my second favorite. But I feel like it's an essential hard rock metal album of the '80s, and it's "Shout at the Devil" from Motley Crue.
Yes.
The thing with the videos from this one too, the "Looks That Kill" and "Shout at the Devil," Too Young to Fall in Love, all those songs. They didn't even do Helter Skelter on here. Not as good as the Beatles, but they do it really good. But the songs like Red Hot and Knock 'Em Dead Kid are so good on this. And this is just essential 80s metal. Or I always call it metal. People call it hard rock now. It's really confusing to me. Because back in the 80s, all this was metal. So I'm still calling it metal. This one here, I feel like you can't tell the story of 80s hard music without Shout at the Devil coming in there. And especially, they had that crazy look too. You open up you got there.
Right. Yeah.
They were just a little different. They were like a mixture of Kiss and pre-Poison. Not that the Poison was around, but that kind of mixed those two styles together. You got or Twisted Sister and Kiss or something. I don't know. But
I almost showed that record. I think what's really cool about Motley Crue is, like you were saying, their look. With Too Fast for Love, they're like the glam and leather. Then Shout at the Devil, they were going for the whole satanic thing. Then Theater of Pain, it's like, all right, let's be a hair band, glam. And then Girls, Girls, Girls was like street. And then Dr. Feelgood was like, we're on top of the world. So, yeah, I mean, they were able to kind of adapt their look and sound to match whatever those styles were in the 80s.
Mm-hmm. And Too Fast for Love is my favorite Motley Crue record, but I think this is their most important record.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember
that makes sense.
Yeah.
I agree with that, and I'd probably say the same thing too.
Yeah. The songwriting on that album is awesome. They had some great melodies, great hooks. The riffs are killer on that. It's a great album.
Yeah.
Right, Jeff?
Yeah, no, I was gonna say my friends had that album growing. I'm like, there's no way my parents would ever let me have that album. I had to go to my friend's house to listen to it. But yeah, I totally remember when that came out, and there's that whole parental thing, like maybe backwards message or whatever that thing is, maybe some backwards messages on this album or whatever. And it was like, ooh. And then the whole "God bless the children of the beast," like what?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, that was controversial in my household. But anyway, so my next pick is going to be, and this I could have picked any album that this artist released in the 1980s, but I'm going to pick what I think was the last album that he released in the 80s. And I'm going to talk. This is Prince. Nice. Sign of the Times. This is a double album. And I feel like this kind of like it summed up like the entire 80s for Prince. You've got hard rock on here, you've got funk, you've got elements of pop. It's like spans the whole every genre that Prince represented in the 1980s you have on here. But it's a great, great album. You got the Look, which is a duet he did with Sheena Easton. Sign of the Times. There's even a movie, like a concert film after this album came out, which was great. But Prince, I mean, you can't talk about 80s music without talking about Prince. And I feel, I could have gone with Purple Rain or Around the World in a Day or, whatever. But I just feel like this is sort of like his White Album. and it's like everything that he did great on a sprawling 2-record set. But love that one.
That is an awesome pick. Prince was untouchable at that time. He was awesome.
Yeah,
You didn't want to show Love Sexy?
Yeah, well, it was like, was that night? I think that was 1990 though, right?
Okay.
I think that was 80s. Yeah.
Thank God.
I still like 1999 the best of his stuff, but that's a good one too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Well, the fact that you picked one that kind of, like you said, it's all encompassing of everything that he does. So that's a very good pick for Prince. Okay. So this one is from 1983. And I remember the first time I saw the video that they released from this, and I heard, I've got a superstitious woman and she's got a superstitious mind. Go with Whitesnake, Slide It In. Now, I am one of the people that, like many people, this is kind of when I discovered Whitesnake. So, I didn't even realize at that time that, oh, guess what? Whitesnake's been around for a long time. And before that, David Coverdale was in Deep Purple for a few albums. I was still gaining my musical knowledge. So I think maybe I'd kind of heard about that, but I didn't really know anything by him. But, I heard this and I had to get the tape of that. And this was just so cool because I know that, Robert Plant always likes to act like David Coverdale is just a ripoff of him, but he's not. I feel like he brings something out. Robert Plant's great. I'm not saying anything, but David Coverdale has his own style. I mean, he's got a little bit more soul to his voice, than what Robert Plant does. And he brings it out in these songs. I mean, there's like, without starting to sound like Chris, but, David Coverdale has a sexiness in his voice, that he adds to rock and roll and to hard rock. I mean, and, Whitesnake, this is right before, of course, they exploded, with their 1987 Whitesnake album. But this is what kind of greased it, got them going for that point. And, I actually prefer this one, a little bit more than the 87 one. But I mean, I love that one too. Don't get me wrong. But I just think, when I just look at the first three tracks, there's Slide It In, Slow and Easy, and Love Ain't No Stranger. I mean, that is just fucking awesome. I mean, just those songs right there in a row. Those are just fantastic songs that I could go put this record on right now and I'm going to be rocking out to it. And, I know there's controversy on remixes and who plays what and all that kind of stuff. But, this was a transitional album for Whitesnake, and they went from more blues to, becoming what they were going to become when they kind of conquered the world type thing. So this point right here is the point that I really love. So.
Me too. That's my favorite Whitesnake album as well, and it's just awesome. Even my wife likes that record. And that's where I got into.
She likes the sexy David Coverdale. See, that's what it is.
Yeah, I think he's awesome, and that record there is a perfect fit.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks.
He's an amazing vocalist.
Oh yeah,
he is.
I mean, when Richie Blackmore trusts you to head Deep Purple,
and you're just a kid,
yeah.
Oh. Yeah, you mentioned Josh. I forgot to say, Josh is one that gave me this album. So thank you, Josh. Really appreciate it. I didn't have it on vinyl until you gave it to me. So thank you.
Well, speaking of Josh and Jeff, I know Josh and Jeff are going to like my next pick from 1987, The Cure's Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. So I told you guys in the beginning of the video that there's a couple artists here that I wanted to show a different album because I feel like I always show Disintegration by The Cure for good reason. I mean, Disintegration is my favorite Cure album. And for a lot of Cure fans, that's their favorite Cure record. But Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is just as good. And I want to point out the hit on here, Just Like Heaven, because the song Just Like Heaven just has that 80s sound to it. And the Cure were, I mean, I love the Cure. A lot of people I know don't really like the Cure because I think it really comes down to Robert Smith's voice. But you know, and Jeff will back me up on this. The Cure started out as like a quirky, kind of post-punky type depressing band, you know, but really cool stuff. And then they sort of started to meld into this pop thing. And I feel like with Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, they sort of really solidified that pop sensibility, because I feel like with Disintegration, it's not as poppy as this album is. There's some fun songs on here. And like I said, the hit Just Like Heaven still screams 80s. So I want to definitely represent the Cure, but I wanted to show something other than Disintegration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great one. And that, you know, again, I keep saying this is their White Album, but that's really their White Album. It's like every style that they ever did is on there. You got some punk sounding stuff. You got the more kind of, I don't want to say doom and gloom, but, you know, they've got sitar on there for crying out loud. And then you got poppy stuff. But yeah, they kind of ebbed and flowed. You know, they had that punk sound, and then they went into kind of the more goth sounding music, and then they pulled out of it and got very poppy, very kind of synth pop, very much new wave. And then with that album, you know, that's sort of like their most mature album to date. And then Disintegration was the album that followed that. But that's why that's my favorite Cure album, because it's a mixed bag of everything that they did great and that they did brilliantly. There's not a weak track on there. For being a double album, it's a legitimate double album. It's not, you know, it was a single album, but, you know, because it's a repress, we put it on 2 records. No, that was a double album when it came out. And there's a lot of music to digest, but all of it was great. There wasn't any filler on it at all.
I concur.
Cool choice.
Is there a song on there called Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me?
No, there's a song called The Kiss.
There's a lyric. I think the lyric for the first song on the album, if I'm not mistaken,
Does it say Kiss Me,
has
Kiss Me,
Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me on it. Yeah.
But I love the ballad Catch. That's so good. I mean, Why Can't I Be You? Hey You.
Torture. I love Torture.
Yeah. But you're right, though, Jeff. It really encompasses all their sort of styles, which I think is cool.
Yeah, and there were 3 singles: Hot, 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 Just Like Heaven, and Why Can't I Be You off that album that were really big back in the day. All right, Aaron.
All right, well, this next one here is the debut album by one of my favorite singers, but he was in bands before this. But this one just kicked off a whole new thing, and it's Holy Diver from Dio. And this album is just, it reminds me so much of the 80s, riding around with my friends, driving around playing this, drinking beers, and just every song just hits you in the face. Just so good. Started with Stand Up and Shout, and right into Holy Diver, and then Gypsy, and Caught in the Middle. Don't Talk to Strangers is so amazing, where it starts out all mellow and just kicks in. And of course, you got Straight Through the Heart. And the song Invisible, I absolutely love. Rainbow in the Dark. But this, I think, is the best album that Ronnie James Dio has ever done. It's still my favorite thing. I like it better than the Rainbow records. I like it better than the Sabbath records. It's my favorite album he's ever done. And I think his vocals are perfect on it. And Vinny Appice's drumming is phenomenal. And Vivian Campbell has such great guitar work. Jimmy Bain's amazing on the bass on it. And the songs just are so memorable. And it's just, I can't listen to just one song list. I have to hear it the whole thing. And then I have to put on Last in Line because it's like a twofer. But this album here is, I couldn't live without this being in an 80s thing. So Holy Diver, one of my favorite records ever. And my favorite thing that Ronnie James Dio has ever done, like I said.
And why did they redo that cover for the reissue? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I know it's weird, huh?
Yeah, I mean, I love, that's an iconic cover. Why did they have to redo it? I don't understand.
Well, Ronnie James wasn't alive when they did that, so if he was alive, he
Yeah,
knows.
true.
Yeah, so it's
Yeah,
just
he didn't have any
hard.
say in it.
Yeah, and it is
Yeah.
interesting. I like the new one because you hear different things, but I always will go back to this original. And this sounds, the production on it doesn't sound 80s production. It sounds phenomenal. You put it on, and it just blows right out of the stereo and sounds really crisp, really great sounding record.
Mhm.
It is. That's something I always thought about those first couple of Dio albums is the sound itself is unique to those albums. I feel like, when you listen to the sound of the drums and everything, it's like there's even like, when you go back to Vinny being in Sabbath there for an album, those drums still sound different. I mean, what they did, those two albums have a unique sound all their own. And I mean, they're better than you have a right to expect. I mean, I know that sounds stupid, but like, when you think when Dio left Sabbath and, he left a band where he was making amazing music and working with Tony Iommi, it's like, well, okay, he worked with Richie Blackmore, he worked with Tony Iommi. Now what's he going to do? Oh, well, he's going to find this young kid named Vivian Campbell, and they're going to make, a couple albums, well, 3 albums, but 2 of them are amazing. One's okay. They make these albums that are just like, holy shit, it's just unbelievable how good those albums really are.
Couldn't have said about
And they definitely stand the test of time.
Yeah. I never get tired of them. I can play it right now and still be rocking out. And
Let's do it. Go play.
I would, but I tried with a Dio thing and it got blocked, so I can't do it.
We should do a Tipsy Tuesday right now.
Yeah.
I'm getting there.
I'll throw some vodka in here or something.
All right, my pick, and this is, to me, it kind of bridges the gap between the 70s and the 1980s. And if I were going to recommend one album to somebody who wanted to get into this band, it would probably be this album. And this is the last album that this band would release that I think pretty much 99% of their fan base would agree was a solid album. After this album, I think you get people like, oh, that sucked, or I hate that album. But I'm talking about Van Halen and Fair Warning. And, this album is, they could have kept going and kept putting out albums like Van Halen 2 and Women and Children First. They had a formula. They could have kept on with that. But to their credit, this was a very experimental album, and I think very successfully so. You got Unchained on here, which has one of the greatest riffs ever. You've got, great heavy rock like Mean Street, but then you've got kind of some stuff that they never tried before, like Push Comes to Shove, Sinner's Swing. My only complaint with this album is 1 foot out the door should have been a little longer. I feel like it fades out right when it's really catching steam. But I think this show is kind of like, we can mix it up, we can do different things and yet do it very successfully. And they hadn't become really famous yet. And so I don't know. I just think, this album to me, like, again, if I had to recommend one album to somebody who wanted to get into Van Halen, it would probably be that one, just because they try so many different things, but none of it fails. They do it all successfully and convincingly. And, I could have picked 1984, but I don't know. I feel like at that point, some of the gloss was starting to come off, and, I don't know. I feel like, those first 4 Van Halen albums for me are just untouchable. They're perfect. And then after that, it's like, well, yeah, it's good, but, there's always a but. You talk about any Van Halen album after Fair Warning, there was always like, well, it's a good album, but there's too much synthesizer, or there's too many covers, or you know, whatever it may be. I think most Van Halen fans would argue that Fair Warning is a perfect, flawless album. So
Absolutely. My favorite.
It's also that's the last album where Eddie's guitar just sounded nasty.
Mhm.
You know, I mean, I love Diver Down. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great. You know, in 1984, but Fair Warning, that's just a badass sounding album. And his guitar, he sounds like he's pissed off when he's playing. And that sound, you know, it gets a little watered down with Diver Down, a little more watered down on 1984, and then way fucking watered down once it becomes Van Hagar. I mean, you take one of those Van Hagar albums and you put it up against Fair Warning, and it's laughable. I mean, you can't even compare them. That album is so fantastic, and I'm the same way. If I was going to recommend one Van Halen album from the 80s, it would definitely be Fair Warning, without a doubt.
It's got 4 of my top 10 Van Halen songs. That's all I can say. It's in Mean Street, Unchained, Hear About It Later, which is the most underrated Van Halen song almost. I love that song. And So This Is Love. All those 4 are like 4 of my top 10 Van Halen songs all in one record. So.
Yeah, and I
Swing.
No, that's great too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think Eddie was feeling a lot of pressure because, you know, the whole, you know, Van Halen rested on his shoulders. He was the one that was coming up with the riffs, coming up with the music. And he would talk about, you know, the rest of the band would be out partying and living the rock and roll lifestyle. And he'd have to be in his hotel room trying to come up with riffs or, you know, songs for the next Van Halen album. And I think that pressure, you know, so if he sounds pissed off, if his riffs sound pissed off, it's because I think he kind of like resented, like, you know, okay, I'm the only one who, you know, creatively is going to come up with anything. We live or die by, you know, the music that I'm able to create. But yeah, Fair Warning, I think Fair Warning was the end of an era. And I love Diver Down. I love 1984, but Fair Warning, it was just after that, it was just never the same for Van Halen.
And you got to give David Lee Roth a lot of credit for those lyrics too. I mean, his lyrics, they're underrated. His lyrics are so good.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, good choice.
Okay, my next one is from 84. And this is another one, you know, I first heard it because I saw a video. And all of a sudden I saw this guy who was taking Albert King and Buddy Guy and Howlin' Wolf and Jimi Hendrix, mixing it all together. And that's Stevie Ray Vaughan for Couldn't Stand the Weather. I think everybody thought blues was dead at that point. All of a sudden, here's a video on MTV of this guy playing blues guitar, singing, wearing that hat, just looking really cool. Remember that video, the rain's going on him and he's playing, and then I'm like, man, who is this guy? And then you find out, oh, this is the guy that told David Bowie to fuck off because he wasn't paying him enough when he was on tour. And so he just decided, you know, I'm just going to go work on my own stuff. And, you know, he had been around for a while down in Texas, playing all the clubs and stuff, cutting his teeth on all that. And I've just never heard anybody play guitar like Stevie Ray Vaughan. And there you go. I was lucky enough to see him a couple times. And, you know, those are moments that I will cherish, you know, for as long as I have memory before I get Alzheimer's. So Couldn't Stand the Weather.
Because I just listened to that record on Tuesday.
Ah. Yeah.
A preview.
Yeah.
We know what to expect next week.
Yeah. Well, it's not
Yes.
it's not a one, but it might be starting the video.
Well, Stevie Ray Vaughan, for some people, you know, in the 80s was a gateway he was my gateway to the blues. I never really was interested in the blues until I heard Stevie Ray Vaughan. One of my friends got me into Stevie Ray Vaughan. I'm like, holy crap, this guy's incredible. And yeah, I mean, it's just such a tragic story. He just cleaned himself up, released the In Step album, and then he dies in that plane crash. You know, why couldn't it have been Robert Cray? But
I know.
the
boring guy.
Whatever. I'm just kidding.
All right, I'm getting heavy for this next pick. Yeah.
But
Here we go. This is not my favorite album by this artist, this band. But it is a phenomenal album from 1988. I still remember listening to it on the bus. My friend gave me the cassette, popped it in my Walkman, and I was blown away by Metallica's Injustice for All. Now, my favorite Metallica albums, Ride the Lightning. Master of Puppets is getting a lot of talk because, of course, Master of Puppets was in the Stranger Things. But Injustice for All had the song One. And that video, I keep going back to videos, but videos were a huge part of my childhood. That changed the musical landscape. I mean, people who didn't listen to Metallica before suddenly were turned on to Metallica because of the video One. And this is a heavy ass album. Say what you want about the production with not hearing the bass, all that bullshit, but it's a phenomenal record. It's proggy. And after this album, Metallica said, basically, listen, we took thrash as far as we can take it. We went as fast as we could. We made the songs as long as we could. We lyrically, we took thrash as far as we could. And that's when we got the Black Album. But Injustice for All is a phenomenal record from 1988. I think a lot of bands took what Metallica was doing and kind of copied it. I'm talking about Testament and other bands like that. They took that sound. All of a sudden, everybody's drums started to sound like Lars's drums, the snares and everything. But yeah, I mean, I had to throw Injustice for All in there, even though, again, it's not my favorite Metallica record, but it still kicks some serious ass.
Great choice.
Yeah.
Starting off with Blackened, man, that song is so good. I love
Yeah. And then, of course, you have the sort of the remembrance of Cliff Burton in To Live Is to Die. And then I love the song Dyer's Eve. The lyrics for that song, man. Harvester of Sorrow. Yeah. It's just a great record.
That's a good pick. Solid.
That is just a perfect pick because I saw them on that tour. And my next pick was the opening band for this album.
Oh.
So when you're
all right, cool. So a segue to Aaron.
Yeah. So this one is very important because it's just so unique because I didn't really like concept records until Operation Mindcrime. Ooh. And this and I saw that tour. It was Injustice for All and Operation Mindcrime tour, and it was just amazing. And they put every song from this, and the lady wore black. That's all they did. So I was like, "Where's all the Reach for Order stuff? Where's the Warning?" But it was just so hearing this live, and they had the big screens, and this just opened a lot of people's eyes to a different style of music. I thought in the '80s, and they had the videos that were really cool from this one too, and that's just crazy. You had the Injustice for All right before this one.
Yeah, we were sending waves through the internet. So
yeah, and I'll never forget that concert. It was one of my favorite concerts I've seen. That was the best time I've seen Metallica a few times, but that was the best concert I saw them on. But this album here, just Jeff Tate's voice and the drumming on this phenomenal too, and it's just very, very intricate and progressive. Yeah. The whole concept thing, and I think this is a very important album for the '80s for all those reasons.
I think people forget about Queensryche, that they were one of those bands, sort of like Motley Crue, where they were able to change their sound. Because, like you were saying, the first couple records, I don't know how many were before Operation Mindcrime. I know the Warning and two.
Bridge Order.
Yeah, they were. I mean, they were heavier.
Mm-hmm.
And then Operation Mindcrime, of course, was the Progressive Story album. And then Empire, of course, didn't Empire have Silent Lucidity?
Yeah.
Jet City
So-
Woman.
Yeah, so they were able to kind of change throughout their albums to become this commercial success.
Yeah, they were
And,
really
like,
EP. And then The Warning was a little different. And Rage
Yeah.
for Order was almost gothic and
Yeah.
really different. And then they did that Operation Mindcrime, which blew all my friends away and me away when I first heard it. Like, what is this? This is so unique.
Yeah.
and it exposed everybody to Jeff Tate and the
Mhm.
range, and you know what a unique voice that guy has.
Oh, yeah.
Can he sing anymore?
Yeah.
He can still sing. Yeah.
Because I know Don Dokken can't anymore.
Yeah, I know. That's
A lot of
shame.
guys lose it when they get, another 50s, 60s, 70s. It's hard. All that singing on their, singing for that many years.
Yeah.
They're not everyone's Glenn Hughes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Susanna Hoffs.
Yeah.
Or Jeff Witcher.
Yes.
Yeah.
Ah, Jeff Witcher. Okay. We're waiting for a synth pop album here, Jeff.
Yeah, well, there'll be one or two maybe in my pick, but anyway, this next one, this is a band that had been around since the 1960s, and a lot of people wrote this band off and thought, we're never going to get another great album by this band, but we were woefully mistaken, and we got an album that I think surprised a lot of people at how good it was, how diverse it was, how many different styles they could do, and so but you've got Heart and Soul, which was the heart and soul of this album. You've got what
now, Jeff? I'm a huge Monkees fan, but dude, Pool It sucks.
All right, I'm just kidding. I had to throw that in.
You can't visit me anymore in October, Jeff. You can't visit me now.
All right. Anyway, okay. So you asked for synth pop, you get synth pop. Okay. Duran Duran Rio is a phenomenal album. It's the best album that Duran Duran ever released, and it opened the floodgates to a lot of other UK, whatever, just synth pop. This popularized synth pop. It was all over MTV. The video is Save a Prayer, Rio, Don't Stop the Rain is on here, New Religion. It's just Duran Duran's masterpiece. I think the first three Duran Duran albums are just flawless. But this one has always been my favorite. And listen to the bass work. Listen to John Taylor's bass work. He's freaking amazing. And that's why he doesn't get enough credit because, it's Duran Duran, they're a synth pop band or they're a boy band, like whatever. But no, listen to like even the song Rio, listen to that bass line and how sophisticated that is. But Duran Duran, yeah, they had kind of that glam image, that pretty boy image, but their music was solid all the way through. And this is just from start to finish, just great. It's heavy. It's synth pop. It's moody. You can dance to it. It's just a great, great album.
I love Hungry Like a Wolf, that video, because it came out right around the Raiders of the Lost Ark time. And so it was when I was, I was like 13, whatever. And I really gravitated to that because I thought it was cool because it was like that movie, kind of reminded me of it. And I love that record.
It's a great record.
Yeah.
Jeff. That's a good pick.
Well,
Yeah,
and
they
Chris,
were
don't
huge.
act like you don't have Pool It either.
I have Pool It. And
Okay.
Well, I've got it. I don't listen to it, but
I just don't want to be in this video like, oh my God, Jeff has Pool It. Ugh. Don't shame me when I know two of you have Pool It as well.
the only reason I have Pool is because I love the Monkees and I'm a completist.
Yeah, well, that's the same thing. That album's a piece of shit, but like whatever. I gotta own it. But yeah.
I have no idea. I bought it, but just because it says Monkees on it. There was a guy at work that's from England, and so and he's like around my age, and so he lived there in the 80s, and he met Simon Le Bon, and and his girlfriend or wife at the time, whatever it was. Anyway, I'll tell you that story later.
It's a
So
great
my
story.
next pick, my next pick, I'll try to do this quick because I see we're taking forever here. I know that Aaron will go along with this one. I don't know about the other two, but Don't Say No by Billy Squier.
Yes.
I mean, this album, geez, God, this was huge. And here was another album that also girls liked. It wasn't just guys. And In the Dark opens this thing up, and just one of my favorite songs. I mean, God, I love that song so much. And it just starts off an album that is just great song after great song. I mean, this isn't one of these albums that has 3 or 4 good ones. You play this sucker from start to finish. And Billy Squier was an amazing songwriter. I don't know why he's not talked about more, because he put out a string of really good albums. And this is probably the best of them. I'm not putting his other ones down, but this thing here to me is a masterpiece. So Don't Say No from 81, I think.
It was one of them I pulled. It's right there. Can't see it very well.
I see it. I
Right
think
there.
I see it. Yeah.
Right by the
Yeah, I'm gonna
car.
go real quick with my pick as well. Jeff showed this artist already, but I'm going with Purple Rain. I mean, this is the greatest hits. Let's Go Crazy, Darlin' Nikki, When Doves Cry, I Would Die for You, Baby I'm a Star, and of course the title track, Purple Rain. There was a movie, I've never seen the movie. There's a hot chick on the cover. Prince is in purple. What else can I say? It's an awesome album.
Oh no, let's go.
I've never seen the movie before. I've never
It's
seen
not good.
Under the Cherry Moon, I think, was another movie of his, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But
You'd like to sing at the lake, but other than that, it's
Yeah.
yeah. The Scene at the Lake.
yeah. Okay, I'll slow it down on it. Now this one here is so influential, and this actually really made me like this band more and exposed me to their whole career. And it's Live After Death from Iron Maiden, probably my favorite live album of the 80s. And it's just, I heard this, I had it on cassette, and I kind of knew Iron Maiden, but not really well. And then I heard this and I played it over and over and over. And then when I went back to get the other stuff, I knew half the songs already, which is really cool. And they sound so good on this. And I still think this is one of the top 3 or 4 live albums ever made. It's got everything from Aces High, Number of the Beast, Running Free. It's got the Paul Di'Anno stuff and all the way up to the Power Slave. So Live After Death, essential 80s live album.
Yeah.
That's one
For
of the
sure.
one of the greatest live albums ever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was super into Iron Maiden when that thing came out. Oh my God, I used to play the shit out of that album.
Yeah, me too. I played it to death and don't have my cassette anymore. I wish I did. Yeah.
All right, Jeff Witcher.
All right. Well, this one, I mean, this is kind of like one of the these no-brainer picks, and I'm surprised nobody else has shown it yet. But it was released in 1987, and I think it just changed the face. This is, there's not many albums you can call a game changer, but I feel like this is one of them. Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction. This just changed the face of rock and roll, just like Van Halen 1 changed the face and the landscape of rock and roll. It's just really hard to understate or overstate the importance of this record and how influential it was. But Appetite for Destruction is just an incredible, flawless album. Obviously, Paradise City, Sweet Child of Mine, Welcome to the Jungle, Rocket Man, all these songs on here. It's like a greatest hits, like you were saying before about Purple Rain. It's just a spectacular album. They never did any better than this album. This was always so many bands, after this were trying to replicate it. Guns N' Roses never came close to replicating the masterpiece that was their debut. But yeah, Appetite for Destruction.
I think now people just they kind of don't think about it as much because it's so overplayed. But yeah, you can't. The significance of it when it came out was just incredible. I mean, anybody that liked hard rock and stuff loved that album.
Mm-hmm.
And people that didn't like hard rock loved that album.
Had an attitude to it that a lot of albums didn't have.
Exactly. Attitude. That's exactly.
Yeah, and it kind of took it back to like the Rolling Stones, like those gritty Jimmy Miller albums, or some of the other classic, hard rocking, ball busting, bands from the 1970s. It really, took it back to the basics, the Faces, all of that. Just such a great album.
There was almost a dangerous element to them at that time too. Back then, it's like they were kind of a weird thing where you didn't know what they were going to do. Wherever they were, there was always an element of danger to it, which added a lot, I thought.
Yeah, totally. Okay, my next pick is from 1984. It's the fourth studio album by this band, and that is Unforgettable Fire by U2. To me, this was a big change for this band. They did War, which I thought was a really good album at the time, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool. These guys are really, kind of evolving, but it's like all of a sudden they went as far as they could with the style they were doing. And then they did this album, which to me, I mean, I know, I probably should be showing the Joshua Tree because, that's when they got super humongous and everything. But I feel like this is the album that led to it, because this is the one that all of a sudden established them as being this bigger band and everything. Like if you ever watch Live Aid and, you see their performance of Bad on there, and just U2 just all of a sudden, it's like they won over the world, and they were touring off of this album. And this has this dense, it has this dense sound to it that was so different. And I mean, they were evolving as musicians, as songwriters. And to me, this is still my favorite U2 album. So Unforgettable Fire from 1984 by U2.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do, they went with Brian Eno as their producer, and he took them in a totally different direction. I think they had taken that sound from their first three albums, Boy, October, and War, as far as they were going to. And they had to grow or, pretty much wither away. And I think, Unforgettable Fire, that was, like you say, the bridge to the Joshua Tree. But what a mature sounding album. It's so different from the album War. Just like Achtung Baby was such a different record from the Joshua Tree. But yeah, it's a magnificent album. It's very cinematic. It's one of those albums that you just have to sit with. It's not something you can just kind of put on as background music. But Pride in the Name of Love, obviously was a big hit off of there. But
and that song sounds kind of different than the rest of the album.
Yeah,
which is funny. I mean, that was the biggest hit off the album, but it kind of has a different sound than the rest of it.
Right.
Nice.
Christopher.
All right. Well, I'm first punk album of the night. So, a lot of times we think of punk in the 70s with the Sex Pistols and the Clash and things like that. But the 80s, the 80s with the Ramones, 70s into the 80s, of course. But, California Punk, a band out of San Francisco, going with the Dead Kennedys. And this was their debut this is their debut from 1980 called Fresh Fruit for Rotting Vegetables. And just a very unique but influential punk band. You, of course, had Jello Biafra on vocals. and East Bay Ray on guitar. Now, the reason I'm mentioning the guitarist is because he sort of put some surf guitar into the sound of the Dead Kennedys, which is kind of cool. So you get that California surf guitar sound in a punk record. This has two of their most famous songs on it, California Uber Alles and Holiday in Cambodia. But the Dead Kennedys, extremely, extremely influential punk band, and this was one of the best. So I had to show some Dead Kennedys.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Actually, I have quite a few of their records. That's a really good one.
Yeah, my favorite is Plastic Surgery Disasters, but that's a great. Fresh Fruit is a great one too.
Yeah. All right, my next one, and this one totally changed my life when it came out. Kind of like Quiet Riot did and Def Leppard. This one took me in another level, and it's Peace Sells But Who's Buying from Megadeth. You know, when you first see the video for Wake Up Dead, and it's just got that little singing and all that killer music, and it keeps changing, how these changes, and it comes back with the vocals at the end, and it just blew me away, and it led me into getting into more thrash music. I know I listened to a little Metallica and a little Anthrax, but Megadeth really made me go into the more heavy side of metal, especially this record here. It's just it turned me on to the blues even, which is really weird because they do a cover of the Willie Dixon song. And that's how I really discovered blues music, was from this record. And I really started getting into the blues after this. But stuff like Good Morning Black Friday is just so unique, and the title song, just nothing really sounded like it. They were a little heavier and a little faster than Metallica, and a little more complex, and I really liked that. And this one just totally changed my life when it came out in '86, and I never have looked back since that album.
And I don't know if you mentioned this because I left for a second, but MTV used the bass line from Peace Sells for Headbangers Ball.
Yeah, they use that some SOD songs they use for the.
Boom, ba-dum, dum, 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 da, da, dum, da, dum, da.
Yeah, it's an unmistakable song, that one.
And yeah. Dave Mustaine he has such a cool voice. It's like the snarling sort of, I don't know. It's
almost like a thrash punk, like a edge to it. You know, that's what made them different too.
Yeah.
But they were so complex, and their guitar work was so complex. It was not just power chords. It had all these different time changes, but it was interesting too.
Good pick.
But that album, they also have songs
in
there. You know, I mean, like some bands just play fast, and I mean, but you know, you mentioned they're complex, but you know, they had songs you could sing.
And I have many times. Especially
my next pick, you know, this is what I consider to be a synth pop, but it's a synth pop masterpiece. It's a band that started out, they were in the 70s, and they were very much into art rock. This is their Abbey Road. This was the last album that they released as a band, and it is just a masterpiece of an album. And I'm talking about Roxy Music and Avalon. You know, you got the title track, Avalon. You've got More Than This, the main thing. It's just what a way to go up, you know, and this would sort of like foreshadow Brian Ferry's solo career. But it's just an incredible album. And this kind of ushered in the new romantic era. You know, you had David Bowie that would sound like this, bands like, you know, Spandau Ballet, or some of the synth pop, early synth pop bands, even Duran Duran to some extent. But, you know, there's guitar on this album, but there's also synth, but it doesn't sound dated in any way. You listen to this, and a lot of synth pop albums sound very much 1982 and 1983. This was released, I believe it was 1982, but it's timeless. It's a classic album. It's the way, you know, there were only 3 members of Roxy Music. There was just Brian Ferry, Andy McCabe, Phil Manzanera at this point, but just what a way to go out, and what a forward sounding album this was. So many bands copied the template for this album, and even their previous album, Flesh and Blood, was kind of pointing the way to, you know, what would become very popular MTV new wave synth pop sounding music. But this is just a masterpiece of an album, and one of my favorite albums of the 1980s.
Nice.
Awesome.
I like Roxy Music, but I've never heard that one.
Yeah, it's excellent. If you ever find it, definitely pick it up.
I will. Good choice.
Avalon. Okay. I guess I probably don't need to talk about this too much because we all know it. But this one came out in 1981. Mob Rules. Aaron had talked about how the first couple Dio albums was the favorite things for him that Dio has ever done. This is my favorite thing that Dio was ever involved in. The funny thing is like I had a couple of Black Sabbath albums. Well, I actually had 8 tracks when I was like in 6th and 7th grade, and they ended up like 8 tracks due. They busted. And so like I hadn't listened to Black Sabbath for quite a while. And so like I saw this on the record shelf, and I'd been seeing Heaven and Hell with the Angels smoking and stuff. But you know, money was, you had to really be picky with what you bought. But I just saw the cover. I had no idea that Ronnie James Dio was the singer of this or anything. I just bought it, played it, started listening to it. I fell in love with this album. It sounded so dark and menacing. I'm like, Jesus, I'd never heard anything like it, but yet they were so cool. And, you know, this was my first exposure to Dio, like I said. And I thought, I love the way this guy sounds. And I just, you know, we know the songs on here. This is just a killer album. And I can't recommend this highly enough. So, Mob Rules.
If Dio wouldn't have put out those first 2, that would be my favorite. That's a great record.
Yeah, I mean, those are the ones that fall next in line for me, too. It's just something, I think probably because that's the first time I heard him. And it's just very special to me or something, you know what I mean?
It's a great one.
Yeah, I like that. I like it better than Heaven and Hell.
Yeah, I do too. I love Heaven and Hell, but yeah, that one I like.
All right. Another artist that you really can't talk about the 80s without mentioning her. I'm talking about Cyndi Lauper and her album, She's So Unusual. I mean, this is a greatest hits. Listen to side 1, Money Changes Everything, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, When You Were Mine, Time After Time. And then side 2 opens up with She Bop.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a great, I mean, Cyndi Lauper, just a phenomenal artist. I always felt like she had sort of like a punk attitude as well. And I got the hype sticker there for Josh. But yeah, I mean, you know, what else can you say about this record? It's just a classic.
You know why that album is so great, Chris? Because you know who helped produce it? The Hooters. The 2 main guys from the Hooters.
Oh, really?
Were responsible for producing that album.
Rick Chertoff or Chertoff?
I don't know. I don't remember what Aaron, you know probably better than me, but I know they helped like with the arrangements on it.
Oh, I've got that Hooters album right here.
Yeah. How the hell did you pick that out so fast?
Well, I told you I picked 50 records out. Oh. This is one of them. That's a great record. Yeah, it's Rob Hyman was the main guy.
Yeah, they helped her with like the arrangements and the songwriting on it.
Was the other guy.
Cool. And then, you know, Cyndi Lauper is now writing Broadway musicals. So, you know, it's crazy.
Yeah, she's incredibly talented.
Yeah.
My grandma even liked her, I remember.
Your grandma?
Yeah.
So, you know, what's funny about this whole adventure here is that I'm showing albums that Aaron's sister liked. And
that was grandma.
I'm showing albums that his grandma liked. So yeah. I'm doing real good here.
I like that Cyndi Lauper.
They're great.
Yeah, she's a great girl.
She just wants to have some fun.
Well, she thought she liked her personality from the videos.
And I never knew She Bop was about masturbation.
Yeah.
And yeah, what's that song? I think I'm turning Japanese. What was that song?
Yeah. By
I
the
just saw
Vapors.
that. I saw that on a list of most racist songs. Was
Yeah.
Turning Japanese.
All right. With
Wow.
that, Aaron.
Well, I got a kind of a different type of pick here, but I think this to me was really important in the 80s, and it's a compilation. That's why it's a different pick. But for me, I had just gotten into this band a couple years earlier, and this one just spans their whole career, and it totally like introduces you to their whole 70s career. If you don't, I grew up listening to them in the 80s first. And this one is what expanded me to get into Kiss in the 70s, was hearing crashes and hits. Because it had it's like career spanning. You know, it's got everything from Love Gun and Deuce and Calling Dr. Love and Strutter, and, you know, and then it's also got their 80s stuff with Tears Are Falling, and Heaven's on Fire and Lick It Up. And then Let's Put the X in Sex was huge on MTV. I still love that song. And I don't care what anyone says about the song. You know, but this one really got me into the older Kiss too. When it was out, it really expanded my whole, because I got into them during Asylum, Crazy Nights, Lick It Up, you know, the whole 80s thing. And I really didn't know their 70s as well until I got this. Then I went back and became obsessed with their 70s stuff. So that's why this was so important to me in the 80s.
That's a great compilation.
That's kind of neat how that, you know, the fact you didn't get in them until their comeback, and then you rediscover, you know, oh, wow, they really had some great stuff in the 70s. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's funny because I got into Kiss in the 80s too, and I didn't even think Gene Simmons sang any songs because all the videos were Paul Stanley.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, Gene Simmons sings some songs too.
Well, when you look at Gene in the 80s, you didn't really want to have him, you know, in those videos too much because he looked bad.
Yeah.
All right,
there's that video. I'm sorry. Go, Jeff. You can go.
No, I was just going to say, my pick is going to be, again, this is kind of a no-brainer, but, you know, college rock, you know, it sounds very pretentious, but at the time, this was a band that I had been into, and not many people knew who they were. And then this was kind of their breakout album, and then everybody was suddenly into this band, and I'm like, you know,
I
I'm
don't like
talking
them
about
anymore now.
REM, and I'm talking about Document. This was the album that broke them huge. I'd been a fan for a while before this album actually came out, and it was sort of like, yeah, you want them to be successful. Obviously, you want more people to get into, you know, what at the time was my favorite band next to the Beatles. But, you know, it's just a solid album, and it didn't sound like anything else that came out from the 80s. It definitely, you know, it's an album that, and I hate to belabor the point, but it sounds timeless. It's one of those records that stands up today. And Document, you know, the one I love, It's the End of the World as We Know It, and I Feel Fine is great. Finest Work song.
Yeah.
But, you know, I just kind of remember, you know, and I was a little protective of this band because they were not a band anybody had heard of until, you know, their videos started getting played on MTV. And then it was like, you know, it loses something when your mom knows who REM is, or, you know, like just the kids at school. It was always kind of like, you know, there's some bands, and I don't know if any of you can relate, where it's like, this cool band nobody's ever heard of, and you feel like you're really cool because nobody knows who they are, but it's great music, and you're making mixtapes for people about, check out this band, how awesome they are. And then it was kind of like, once this came out, it's like, yeah, everybody knows who REM was. But it's just a phenomenal album. not my favorite REM album, but in terms of the 80s, if you were to, recommend an REM album to anybody, it would probably be this one.
Well, I still think that kind of fell under the radar a little bit because wasn't the next album Green?
Yeah.
That's the album that I got into them with, and I feel like that was even a little bit more poppy than Document.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
Aaron, did your grandma like REM?
No. She didn't know who
Not
they were.
until the Green album.
She was one of the people who didn't know who they were, so Jeff would have loved her.
She liked Losing My Religion. That was her first, that was a gateway REM song for grandma.
Shiny happy people.
Yeah.
I was kind of like that with Rush. Because I started liking Rush really early on. And then Moving Pictures came out when I was in high school, and everybody's like, "Oh, I love this Rush band."
This
I'm
new
like,
band, Rush.
I'm like, this isn't even their best album, for God's sakes.
Signals is, and it hasn't even come out yet.
Oh, Signals, give me a break.
Dun, dun,
Anyway.
dun, 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 dun.
My next pick's from 1982, and this, believe it or not, was the album that got me into this particular artist, Nebraska by Bruce
Nice.
Springsteen. I don't know. I don't know what it is about it, but I fell in love with this album. It's just very stark. It's an acoustic album. It's basically a bunch of demos turned into an album. But there you go. Jeff has it too. And I know Chris is a fan. We know that this album it's just a bunch of different stories about different characters throughout America. And Bruce is a great storyteller. And this is just a fantastic record.
I love that record too.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I'm sorry. I would have said Aaron does too.
And Johnny Cash covered a couple tunes off.
Yes, he did.
Yeah. Well, I always love when I end up choosing something that one of you guys choose, because I look up to you guys as like, you know a lot about music. So whenever I choose something and it matches one of you guys, I'm like, all right, it validates me. And Mr. Aaron Mutha Alamere picked Live After Death. I'm picking Live After Death as well. As a kid, I had this on cassette. I don't have it on cassette anymore, but everything that Aaron said is true. It's a great representation of the Paul Di'Anno years. Plus you get, the Number of the Beast, the Peace of Mind, the Power Slave. I mean, Iron Maiden was just a force to be reckoned with. And that artwork, I mean, this could go down as maybe some of the best heavy metal artwork ever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I'm not going to say much more because Aaron basically said it, but Live After Death, one of the greatest albums of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I love Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner on there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
This next one here, I feel like you can't talk about 80s music without having this album. It's one of the biggest selling albums of all time for any hard rock album. It's Back in Black from AC/DC.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
everyone thinking, after Bon Scott died, and for them to come out with this record next is pretty amazing. It's just, everyone knows it, Hell's Bells and the title song, and, every song's great on this album. And it just, I almost picked Who Made Who, but I didn't want to do two compilations. But this one here is just, I can't tell you how many times I was drinking with my friends listening to this album. It's just
you and millions of others people.
Yep. Yeah. All through the
Yeah,
80s.
you're right. That, I'm glad that you picked that, because that really would be ridiculous if we did this video and none of us showed that album. That was so huge. And like you said, I mean, their lead singer died, Bon Scott, and who had a big personality and everything, I mean, and then who would expect that they would put out something that you couldn't help but love that album. I mean, now we've heard it so many times, so it loses some of it. But man, I mean, like Aaron just said, every song is good.
Yeah.
On that album. There's no bad songs
There's
on there.
put it on even now, and it's still you still get going on. You know, it doesn't matter how many times
Right.
you've heard. You have a couple beers and put this
Oh
on.
yeah,
It'll
yeah.
get
You
you.
crank that thing on a nice stereo, and oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you showed that too. Like a lot of times we're trying to be cool and we show like flick of the switch or fly
Yeah.
on the wall or something like that. But it's like showing Pink Floyd, and if you don't talk about Dark Side of the Moon, you're stupid. So, Aaron, thank you for showing Back in Black.
Yeah, great pick.
Yeah.
All right, this next one is my favorite album of the 1980s, bar none, and there's a lot of competition for it. But when it comes down to it, and I can't say this is the best album in the 1980s, but for me, it's always the album that has been my favorite album. I've talked about it endlessly on my channel before, but it is Ghost in the Machine by the Police. I freaking love this album. They did a stylistic shift. They never had synthesizers on an album before, and yet it doesn't sound dated in any way. They use it in such a great fashion. It creates a mood. It's sort of unsettling at times, but the songwriting, the songcraft on here is just incredible. It's my favorite Police album. And released in 1981. Every little thing she does is magic. Invisible Touch, Spirits in the Material World. So many great songs on this record. It was absolutely talking about essential albums. The Police were, the biggest band of the 80s up until the point of Synchronicity, and then when they broke up. But they really were. And this is just a phenomenal, influential album. The band Rush, I think a lot of how they sounded in the 80s has to do with an album like this, but can't say enough about that record. I love the Police and I love Ghost in the Machine.
And Jeff,
It's
I don't
really-
know if you know, but the symbols on the front represent the 3 members of the band.
I'd heard that before. You're
Really?
right.
You told me that.
What's really cool about the album too is, like you said, the synth sound. Like it was totally unique synth sound. It's almost like there's a couple bands that did that. Like ZZ Top with Eliminator, the synth sound didn't sound like regular synth, and Ghost in the Machine. I think they both got that from Depeche Mode, that kind of weird sound, and it made it more tough sounding instead of wimpy synth sounding. And it really was really great on Ghost in the Machine. It really highlighted it.
Yeah,
Are you
exactly.
saying Depeche Mode is a wimpy band, Aaron?
No, I'm saying it gave it a kind of a more menacing quality to the synth instead of the wimpy. They got that from Depeche Mode, the more menacing kind of synth.
The wimpy sound?
Anti-wimp.
Yeah, that's a good point you made about Rush. All you got to do is listen to
Grace Under Pressure.
No, Neil Peart. Well, yes, okay, I'm sorry. But if you listen to Neil Peart's drum sound, specifically his snare sound, kind of starting a little bit on Permanent Waves, but then definitely on Moving Pictures, it's because he was trying to get the sound of Stuart Copeland.
Mm-hmm.
After Zenyatta Mendata. I mean, it was a total, and he admits that. I mean, he readily says that they were heavily influenced by the Police. So that's a very good point.
Yeah, even a song like Digital Man totally sounds like a song the Police would have recorded.
Yeah. Okay, my number 2 pick is both Chris and Aaron have mentioned him. I'm going a little bit different. I'm going with Killers,
Nice.
my Iron Maiden from 81. To me, this is another game changer. You still got Paul Di'Anno, but this is leading a little bit towards kind of, like when you think of Murders in the Rue Morgue, that kind of sounds a little bit more how Iron Maiden is going to become, like on Number of the Beast and Peace of Mind after that. But yet you've got a song on here like Wrathchild, which sounds like an early Judas Priest, you know, type song with a little bit of punk mixed into it. And, you know, they've got instrumentals on here. This is just, you know, if ever there was an aptly named album, Killers, because this album is killer, and that's what it is. And, you know, we've said this on so many of these albums, right? It holds up. This thing holds up today. You still, you know, how many albums has Iron Maiden released? And, you know, probably maybe everybody in this group right here would put this in their top three. I don't know for sure, but I would. And I just think it's a fantastic album. It was part of that new wave of British heavy metal. And this is where they were establishing themselves as being a step up above those bands. And so Iron Maiden, Killers.
Killer pick.
Yeah.
Oh,
Those,
that one.
yeah, the Paul Di'Anno years were awesome.
Oh yeah, they're just so, you know, and like you guys, you just mentioned the cover of Live After Death. I mean, gee, what about this cover?
Yeah.
Come on, that's a t-shirt.
All those Iron Maiden covers are just amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, this next band, you cannot talk about the 80s again without showing this band. And I'm talking about the Bangles.
Yeah.
And their album Different Light. Susanna Hoffs. I joke around about her, but she was so hot. She's still hot. I follow her on Instagram, and she's a MILF. She's still hot. And you know, what, you know, boy didn't have a crush on Susanna Hoffs back in the 80s? I don't know. Did your grandma like the Bangles, Aaron?
They were a little too risque for them.
I mean, Manic Monday, Walk Like an Egyptian, If She Knew What She Wants, you know, even the deeper cuts on this album. But, you know, I think the Bangles actually came from sort of like a punk sort of scene back in their first album or so. And then they sort of morphed into this girl group, but, you know, kind of had like a 60s rock sensibility to their songs. Just a really cool band. And again, I know I keep mentioning Susanna Hoffs, but those eyes, woo, man.
Well, I mean, the thing is, you know, I might have picked the album right before that, but I think the Bangles are underrated.
Yeah.
And part of it is because of, you know, like us sitting here talking about Susanna Hoffs and how much we think she's so adorable and sexy and everything, which is true. But those songs, you know, you just mentioned, you know, kind of having that 60s sound. Totally did. You know, they totally had that whole 60s sound. They had a little bit of the Paisley Park thing going on and everything. You know, everybody just kind of thinks of them as like, you know, Walk Like an Egyptian and stuff. But when you listen, you know, that song doesn't really sound like the rest of their music. And it's those deep cuts that you started to mention there. That's the meat and potatoes of the Bangles. They were a solid band.
Yeah.
You know, they weren't just a couple of hits. They were good songwriters, and they still are. I mean, if you listen to any of their later albums, I'm so glad, you know, you brought that up, because that's just an underrated band. And, you know, they're all females too, you know, I mean, and that was still something that was rare at that time period. So I think that's a great pick.
Thanks.
Was it just them and the Go-Go's? Or were they all girl bands right then?
Yeah, I mean, you had the Runaways in the 70s, but the Runaways never had the success that like the Bangles or the Go-Go's did.
What about Vixen? Vixen.
You had Vixen later in the 80s. Well, you had what was it, Fanny in the 70s, early 70s.
I like them.
Yeah, they're pretty good. But they, you know, they never really had much success in the United States.
Yeah.
Is this our last pick, by the way?
No, that was my ninth pick.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. My next pick's my last.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've been talking about it, because I got to show it, because it's my second favorite album by this band, but it's very close. But this album was everywhere. MTV. It was just, you know, you got to have Stay Hungry in here. Yeah. Twisted Sisters. I mean, Burning Hell and Quarantaria, the beginning, just those two alone. I mean, those aren't even the hits, and they're just phenomenal songs. And of course, We're Not Gonna Take It and I Want to Rock were everywhere, and those videos were so unique and had the whole comedy element mixed in with the just craziness, and it's just an absolutely amazing record. The Price, everyone knows this. Well, not everyone, but it's a great record, and I can't talk about the 80s without this. And this was another huge game changer for me. It was, like you said, it was the Quiet Riot, Def Leppard, Pyromania, and this were the three that really got me into metal. Yeah. And I had to have it represented.
Awesome.
Good choice.
All right. Well, Chris has already shown this band, but to me, this is the pet sounds of the 1980s. And I'm talking about, Disintegration. It's The Cure. It just is. There's no other album, I think, that would qualify in those terms, but it's a flawless album. And Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me is my favorite Cure album, but there's no denying that this is probably the greatest Cure album that they ever released. It's moody, it's cinematic, and places it's a little bit depressing, but it conjures up so many different emotions, and it's the greatest thing that they ever created. It's just a sonic masterpiece of an album. They've never been able to record another album even remotely close to this one. One of the greatest albums of the 1980s. And yeah, it's cliche, but I had to show it. I know you didn't want to show it, Chris, but I couldn't help. When you think of great 80s albums, Disintegration is always in the conversation. Even people who don't like The Cure, I think, find something to appreciate about Disintegration.
Well, I'll say this. The song Pictures of You is probably one of the greatest songs of all time. I'm going to say that because the song structure, the melody, it's the lyrics, it's one of the greatest songs of all time.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah. Well, and it elevated, what many people just thought was, I don't want to say a disposable genre, but people who kind of poo-pooed synth pop or didn't want to know. I think it really, at the end of a decade, it showed, what an art form, synth pop or new wave, alternative, whatever, could be.
Yeah. Great pick. Yeah. I wanted to show Disintegration, but like I had mentioned, I figured I'd show the next best thing, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me.
Yeah. All right. Our last pick, Gary.
All right. My number one pick, I guess I don't really need to talk about it too much because Jeff already did a pretty good job. Ghost in the Machine. It's just a amazing album. I feel like this is kind of when the Police just went boom. Those other, the albums before this were great. I mean, Regatta de Blanc is just right behind it for me, but this album is just magic. You guys talked about the use of synthesizers and everything. I agree with everything you guys were saying about it, so that's my pick.
Awesome. Yeah, I didn't rank my album, so I know this is the last one I'm showing, but I don't really consider this my number one. But we've sort of talked about hair metal, but hair metal was a huge part of the 80s. And I can't really think of any other band that sort of defined hair metal and just took it to that nth degree as Poison did. Yeah. And 1986, Poison was my first concert. You look at that cover, it just screams 80s. The makeup, they just took it to that next level. But they had the songs. I mean, I love Cry Tough. They had so many hits on this. I Want Action, I Won't Forget You, Look What the Cat Dragged In, Talk Dirty to Me. You know, even some of the deeper cuts, like I like Number One Bad Boy. I like Blame It On You. It's a great album. Say what you want about Poison. I know they're not the most popular choice when it comes to hair metal bands, but you can't deny what this album did for the genre.
I love that.
huge.
Yeah. And I like this album better than Open Up and Say Ah.
I like it way better. Not even
Yeah.
close.
Yeah, me too.
And I like Flesh and Blood, but I feel like they were trying to be a little bit more than they were on that album. Like, it's got some good tunes on it, but I think this is who Poison was, this album. And
Yeah.
I know Open Up and Say Ah has Every Rose Has Its Thorn on it, and I love that tune. It's got Fallen Angel on there, but I mean, look what the Cat dragged in. There was still a little bit of heaviness to them. There was like a raw energy in this album.
Nice one.
Yeah.
All right. My last pick is man, I got so many here still that I love. I can go 4 different directions, but you know, no one's shown this, and I got to have Defenders of the Faith in here.
Yes.
Probably my favorite 80s Judas Priest album, easily. I mean,
Great
everyone loves for Vengeance, but I think this is far better. And it can't really have 80s metal without some Judas Priest. You know, the Sentinel. This is just a phenomenal album. Free Will Burning, I love that too. Just,
Oh yeah.
yeah, some hits
That was-
are gonna.
That was on my list till just today. I was still rearranging things and cutting this and that, and I took that out. I'm like, I've got Maiden in there, so I went and took the Priest out, but that was on it. I love that album.
Yeah, and a lot of people say Screaming for Vengeance, but I agree with you though, Aaron and Gary. Defenders of the Faith is awesome.
Yeah, it's like Screaming for Vengeance up a notch.
But Aaron, and I'm being serious here. If you would have shown Turbo, I would have been all in on that choice too, because Turbo is like 80s.
Yep. I was thinking about Turbo, but I think this is just a slightly better record. My favorite 80s Judas Priest.
It's a great album.
Yeah, mine too.
So that's what I'm with. Instead of, all these that I had.
Oh, Cinderella. I love that debut by Cinderella.
That one was a
I'm
close
heavy duty.
Or, you got this one for Gary.
Yeah. Hell yeah.
I didn't even show Wasp.
Peace. Yo.
So Gary didn't show any Ramones. Ramones had some great albums in the 80s.
They did. I've got it behind me. I almost that's another one that just didn't quite get there. I had a hard time narrowing this down. I'll tell you.
Yeah.
I didn't show any Black Flag. I could have shown a Black Flag record too.
And honestly, I figured before this started, in my mind, I said Jeff is going to show some REM, Aaron's going to show some Iron Maiden, and Chris is going to show a Black Flag. So when you didn't show it, because I was thinking, I thought, even living in a little hick town, Black Flag made it to my neighborhood. I mean, I knew of Black Flag, and so they were they were definitely an important band in the 80s. I was really surprised that you didn't.
Yeah, I feel like I talk about Black Flag all the time, so I wanted to represent punk with the Dead Kennedys, but I don't know.
Yeah, when you showed Dead Kennedys, I was like, huh.
Yeah.
All right, the last album that we're going to show today, my last pick, is going to be, this is a power pop masterpiece, and I can't recommend this enough to anybody who has not discovered this band. This to me is one of the best albums of the 1980s. If you like power pop, alternative, it's just a brilliant, brilliant album. It was produced by Todd Rundgren. I'm talking about Skylarking by XTC. It is just a brilliant album. And, the band and Todd Rundgren didn't get along. Todd Rundgren can be kind of an asshole. And the band and there was definitely friction during the recording sessions for this album. You know, and some of the stories are a little bit are kind of funny, you know, like they'd be recording a song and Todd Rundgren would say, well, this is how it needs to be. And they'd be like, well, we want to try it this way. And Todd Rundgren would say, you know, and where they recorded it was not far from they had like rented homes or whatever near the recording studio. It's like, okay, I'm gonna go back to my house. You guys try it your way, and then when you realize it sounds like shit, call me up and then we'll come back and we'll do it the right way. You know, he would do like stuff like that, you know, but he definitely challenged them. He pushed their buttons, and they'd had, you know, certainly their albums before this. I think this was like their 6th or 7th studio album. They were good, but I don't think they had anybody to kind of challenge them and push them to make the kind of album that they were capable of making. But this is just staggering in terms of how great these songs are, how catchy they are. It's ear candy. There's no denying, you know, there's the Beach Boys influence, the Beatles influence, all through this album. Definitely, you know, the best album that they've ever made. And one of my favorite albums of the 1980s. Skylarking is just a breathtaking masterpiece of power pop.
Question.
You know, I've never heard.
What's that?
I've never
I've
heard.
never heard
Yeah.
you before.
Yeah, it's great. I want to BCLT it to all of you because it's that fantastic. But all right, well, guys, great albums that we showed. Not too much overlap, you know, honestly.
There's some.
Yeah, some, but not as much as I was kind of expecting. But you know, anyway, this was one of my runner-ups, as well as, you know, Aaron's going to show his, I'm going to show mine. These are ones that did not make the cut, but were very, very close. So anyway, but great to see you all. And next week we'll pick a different topic, do a different video. But always fun hanging out with you guys. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. And yeah,
Thanks, Jeff.
take care.